The blood-red sunset painted the Montana prairie as Tabitha Parker's shotgun aimed straight at the intruder's chest. Her finger trembled on the trigger, the barrel never wavering from the tall stranger who had appeared without warning at her stable door. 3 days alone at her late father's homestead had made her jumpier than a grasshopper on a hot skillet. "Madam," the man said slowly, raising dust-covered hands, "I mean no harm. My horse is lame, and I'm just looking for shelter until morning." Sweat trickled down Tabitha's spine despite the October chill. The man stood well over 6 feet, shoulders broad beneath a worn leather coat. His face, partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, showed several days' growth of beard, but his eyes clear and blue as a summer sky met hers steadily. "There's a town 12 miles east," she replied, adjusting her grip on the shotgun. "Silver Creek has a fine hotel." The stranger's gaze flicked to the darkening sky. "Won't make it before nightfall. Not with my horse favoring her right front leg so badly." As if on cue, a soft nickering came from outside. Tabitha hesitated. Turning away strangers went against everything her father had taught her about Western hospitality, but being alone made caution necessary. Papa had been dead less than a month, and already the vultures were circling men offering to help the poor widow woman with her ranch, their eyes calculating its value as they spoke empty condolences. "Let me see this horse," she finally said. The man nodded and stepped back slowly, keeping his hands visible. Outside, a magnificent chestnut mare stood favoring one leg, head drooping with exhaustion. Tabitha lowered her shotgun slightly. No man intent on mischief would ride a horse this fine to exhaustion. "What happened?" "Stepped in a prairie dog hole about 3 miles back." The stranger ran a gentle hand down the mare's neck. "She needs rest, water, and for someone to look at that leg." Tabitha approached cautiously, keeping one eye on the man while examining the horse. The mare's leg was swollen but not broken. "I can help her," she admitted reluctantly. "But you'll sleep in the barn, Mr. Nathan Reid." He touched the brim of his hat. "And I'm obliged for any help you can give Isabella here." Tabitha nodded stiffly. "I'm Mrs. Parker. You can water your horse at the trough, and I'll fetch some liniment." "Mrs. Parker," he repeated, a question in his tone as his eyes searched the property for signs of another person. "Widow Parker," she clarified sharply, turning back toward the house. "And don't you forget it." 2 hours later, Tabitha stirred a pot of stew on the cook stove, glancing occasionally toward the barn where Nathan Reid was settling his horse. She'd provided him with liniment, clean wraps, and instructions for treating Isabella's leg. His hands, she'd noticed, knew their way around horses, not the soft hands of a gambler or con man, but the callous grip of someone who'd worked with animals. She startled at a knock on the kitchen door. "Mrs. Parker," Nathan called. "I've tended to Isabella. She's resting comfortably." Tabitha opened the door a crack, the shotgun propped nearby. "Good. There's oats in the bin for her." In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. His face was weathered but younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 to her 26 years. Beneath the trail dust and stubble were even features the kinder sister would have called handsome. "I want to thank you properly," he said. "Most folks wouldn't take in a stranger these days." "I haven't taken you in," she corrected. "You're in the barn." A slight smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. Still, your kindness to Isabella is appreciated." Tabitha hesitated, then sighed. "There's stew. I can bring you a bowl." "I wouldn't want to impose further." The polite refusal somehow irritated her more than presumption would have. "It's just food, Mr. Reid. No need to make it something it isn't." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "Mr. Reid," she repeated firmly. "I'll bring it out in 10 minutes." As promised, she carried a tray to the barn, a bowl of rabbit stew, cornbread, and coffee. Nathan had made himself a small camp in the empty stall next to Isabella, his saddle serving as a backrest against the wall. He'd removed his hat and coat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly, at the nape of his neck. "You're a fine cook, Mrs. Parker," he said after the first bite. "Tabitha," she found herself saying, immediately regretting the slip into familiarity. "And it's just stew." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Nothing just about a hot meal when you've been on the trail as long as I have." "Where are you headed?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "Wyoming. Got some family land near the Tetons." "That's a long way." "Yes, madam, it is." He took another bite, savoring it. "This ranch yours?" "My father's," she said automatically, then corrected herself. "Mine now. He passed last month." "I'm sorry for your loss." Unlike the condolences from others, his simple words held no calculation, no hidden agenda. Tabitha found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed. "I should check on your horse." Isabella stood quietly in her stall, the wrapped leg held slightly off the ground. Tabitha ran expert hands over the swelling, pleased to find it hadn't worsened. "You know horses," Nathan observed. "Raised them my whole life. Papa and I bred quarter horses until—" She trailed off, not wanting to explain how the drought 2 years ago had forced them to sell most of their stock, leaving just 3 aging maras in the corral. "She's a beauty," Nathan said, changing the subject. "Thoroughbred with maybe some Morgan. Good eye." Tabitha patted Isabella's neck. "She'll need at least 3 days rest before she carries you further." "I can't impose that long." "It's not imposing if I'm telling you what your horse needs," she replied firmly. "Unless you want to ruin a fine animal like this permanently." Nathan met her gaze, then nodded. "You're right, of course. I'd be grateful for the time." Tabitha gathered the empty dishes. "First light, you can help with the morning chores to earn your keep. I've got fences that need mending on the north pasture." "Yes, madam," he agreed, a hint of amusement in his voice that she chose to ignore. Back in her kitchen, Tabitha locked the door securely and placed the shotgun by her bed as she'd done every night since her father died. But for the first time in weeks, she felt the crushing loneliness of the house lift slightly. It was just the novelty of conversation, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. Dawn broke with a crisp clarity that promised a fine autumn day. Tabitha dressed quickly in her work clothes, a practical split skirt and chambray shirt that had scandalized the town ladies, but allowed her to ride and work comfortably. She twisted her honey-brown hair into a tight bun, pinning it securely before heading to the kitchen to start breakfast. The smell of coffee greeted her before she'd fully descended the stairs. Nathan stood at her stove, his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 cups. He'd clearly been up for some time. His face was freshly shaved, hair damp from washing. "I hope you don't mind," he said without turning. "Figured the least I could do was have coffee ready." Tabitha paused in the doorway, momentarily speechless. In the month since her father died, she'd grown accustomed to the eerie silence of mornings alone. The simple sight of another person moving about her kitchen struck her with unexpected force. "That's thoughtful," she managed. Nathan turned, offering her a cup. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Your rooster's got a mean streak. Nearly took my eye out when I went for eggs. Beauregard doesn't care for strangers." She accepted the coffee, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Did you manage to get any?" In answer, he pointed to a small basket containing half a dozen brown eggs. "I'll make breakfast then," she said, setting her cup down. "And you can tell me what brought you all the way from—" "Where exactly?" "California, most recently." Nathan leaned against the counter, watching as she expertly cracked eggs into a bowl. "San Francisco got too crowded for my taste." "A city man, then?" "No, madam. Ranch-born and raised in Texas. Just tried my hand at some business ventures that didn't suit me." Tabitha whipped the eggs briskly. "And now Wyoming? My uncle left me land there. Good grazing country, or so they say." He sipped his coffee. What about you? Been in Montana long. All my life. Papa brought me and Mama here when I was just a baby. She didn't add that her mother had died of pneumonia 2 winters later, leaving her father to raise a daughter alone in the wilderness. This land is all I've ever known. Nathan's gaze swept the kitchen, the worn but scrubbed table, the carefully mended curtains, the row of preserves lining the shelf. You've made it a fine home. Something in his tone made her cheeks warm. She turned her attention to the stove, sliding a cast iron skillet onto the heat. It's just a place. No, he said quietly. It's more than that. The simple observation hit too close to home. This land, this house, they were everything to her. Her past, present, and if she could manage it, her future. But the reality of a woman alone keeping a ranch afloat loomed like a shadow over her days. Breakfast passed with easier conversation. Nathan told her about the cattle drives he'd led up from Texas, the year he'd spent panning for gold in California, the horse he'd trained that won 3 consecutive races in San Antonio. His stories were entertaining but modest, lacking the boastful edge she'd come to expect from most men. You've led quite a life, she observed as they finished eating. Just restless, I suppose, he replied with a shrug. Never found a place that felt right to stay. And Wyoming will be different. Something flickered across his face. It has to be. Before she could question him further, he rose and gathered the dishes. You mentioned fences, needing mending. Point me in the right direction, and I'll get started. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Nathan would be up before Tabitha, coffee brewing, feeding the livestock. They would work separately through the morning, Tabitha tending to her vegetable garden and chickens, Nathan repairing fences, a leaking roof, and the broken wheel on her wagon. They'd meet for a midday meal, then check on Isabella together before tackling afternoon chores. By the 3rd evening, Tabitha realized with a start that she'd invited him to eat all his meals in the house rather than the barn, that the shotgun had been moved to the closet rather than kept by her side, and that she'd laughed more in 3 days than in the previous 3 months. You're going to work yourself right out of a place to stay, she commented as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Isabella's leg is looking better every day. Glad to hear it, Nathan replied, though a note in his voice suggested mixed feelings about the mare's recovery. Where will you go after Wyoming? She asked, trying to sound casual. He was silent for a long moment. Haven't thought that far ahead. First, I need to see if the land is what they say it is. And if it's not. Nathan turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. Then I keep looking, I suppose. For what? Home, he said simply. The word hung between them in the twilight. Tabitha looked away first, focusing on the distant mountains. Well, your horse should be fit to travel by tomorrow afternoon, if you're eager to continue your search. She felt rather than saw him shift beside her. I wouldn't say eager, exactly. The conversation might have continued, but the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared on the road leading to the house, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Nathan stood, his posture changing subtly. Expecting company? No. Tabitha rose as well, instinctively moving toward the door where her shotgun waited. No one comes out this way unless they have business. Stay here, Nathan said quietly, his hand moving to his hip where she now noticed he wore a pistol beneath his coat. This is my home, she replied firmly. I'll do the meeting. The riders approached slowly, and as they came into view, Tabitha recognized the lead man with a sinking feeling. Henry Caldwell, owner of the largest ranch in the county and the man who'd been trying to buy her land since before her father's death. Evening, Mrs. Parker, Caldwell called, tipping his hat with false politeness. He was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, his face perpetually flushed from drink and sun. His eyes narrowed as they took in Nathan standing beside her. So you've got company. Mr. Caldwell, she acknowledged coolly. What brings you out so late? Just being neighborly, checking in on a widow woman all alone. His gaze lingered on Nathan. Though I see you're not alone after all. Nathan stepped forward, offering his hand. Nathan Reid, just passing through. Horse came up lame, and Mrs. Parker was kind enough to let me tend to her here. Caldwell ignored the outstretched hand. Awful convenient timing, a stranger showing up right when a pretty widow might be feeling lonesome. Tabitha felt heat rise to her face. Mr. Caldwell, state your business or leave my property. Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just came to make you another offer on this place. $500 more than fair for land this dried up. Not interested, Tabitha replied evenly. Not at 500, not at 5,000. This land isn't for sale. The two men flanking Caldwell exchanged glances. One of them, a wiry man with a scar across his chin, spat tobacco juice onto her yard. Ain't gonna be able to work this place alone come winter, missus. Be smarter to take the money now, for things get difficult. The threat wasn't subtle. Tabitha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Nathan moved closer to her side. I believe the lady gave you her answer, gentlemen. And who exactly are you to speak for her? Caldwell demanded. Some drifter she picked up? For all we know, you could be taking advantage of her situation yourself. That's enough, Tabitha snapped, her patience breaking. This conversation is over. Please leave. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment before jerking his head at his companions. Think about my offer, Mrs. Parker. Winter's coming, and it gets mighty lonely out here. Accidents happen to people all alone. As they rode away, Tabitha realized she was trembling not from fear but from fury. The nerve of that man. Nathan watched the retreating riders until they disappeared into the gathering darkness. Has he threatened you before? Not quite so openly. She wrapped her arms around herself. He's wanted this land for years. There's a creek that runs through the north end of the property, doesn't dry up even in drought years. He'd control all the water rights in the valley if he had it. And your father wouldn't sell? Neither will I. She met his gaze defiantly, as if he might challenge her decision. Instead, Nathan nodded slowly. I respect that. Land that's been in a family means something. They stood in silence for a moment, the tension from the encounter gradually fading. I should check on Isabella before turning in, Nathan finally said. I'll come with you, Tabitha replied, suddenly not wanting to be alone. In the barn, Isabella greeted them with a soft nicker. Nathan removed the wraps from her leg, and Tabitha bent to examine the swelling, which had decreased considerably. She's healing nicely, she confirmed, running her hand down the mare's leg. She'll be ready for light riding tomorrow, I think. Nathan stroked Isabella's nose. Hear that, girl? Almost time to move on. The words brought an unexpected pang to Tabitha's chest. She straightened, brushing hay from her skirt. Well, good night then. Tabitha, Nathan called softly as she reached the barn door. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her pause. Thank you. Not just for Isabella, but for everything. She turned back. In the lantern light, his expression was solemn, his eyes searching hers. It's nothing you haven't worked to earn, she replied, her voice not quite steady. Still. He took a step toward her. It's been a long time since I've felt welcome somewhere. The air between them seemed to thicken. Tabitha found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the fact that they were alone in the soft, shadowed light of the barn. You're leaving tomorrow, she said, more to remind herself than him. Yes. Another step closer. Unless there's a reason to stay longer. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness. She barely knew this man. Yet in the few days he'd been at her ranch, something had shifted inside her, as if parts of herself that had been numb since her father's death were slowly awakening. I can't think of any reason, she lied, taking a step back. Good night, Mr. Reid. She hurried back to the house, closing the door firmly behind her, trying to ignore the hollow feeling that had settled in her stomach at the thought of tomorrow's farewell. Morning arrived with an unexpected gift rain. The soft patter on the roof woke Tabitha from a restless sleep. She lay listening for a moment, calculating what the downpour meant for the day's work. The garden would benefit, but the north pasture would be too muddy for fence mending. And riding even light riding for a recovering horse would be ill-advised on slick ground. The realization brought a surge of relief. She tried not to examine too closely. Downstairs, she found Nathan already in the kitchen, looking out at the gray deluge. Looks like Isabella gets another day of rest, he commented without turning. Too slippery for travel. Probably for the best, Tabitha agreed, moving to the stove. I'll make breakfast. The day stretched before them, contained by rain and proximity. With outdoor work impossible, Tabitha tackled indoor chores that had been neglected, mending clothes, organizing her father's papers, taking inventory of preserves for winter. Nathan busied himself repairing broken tools in the barn, returning to the house periodically, bringing with him the scent of rain and leather and wood shavings. By mid-afternoon, a restlessness had settled over both of them. The rain continued steadily, drumming on the roof, turning the yard to mud. I found these, Nathan said, entering the kitchen with a battered checkerboard and a small box of carved pieces. In the storage room. Thought you might want a game to pass the time. Tabitha smiled despite herself. Papa and I used to play almost every evening in winter. They cleared the table, and Nathan set up the board. The familiar ritual of the game eased the strange tension that had been building between them throughout the day. They played in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional comments about strategy or teasing remarks about the other's moves. You're quite good, Nathan observed after she captured 3 of his pieces in a clever sequence. Papa never believed in letting me win just because I was a girl, she replied, a fond smile touching her lips at the memory. Said life doesn't give you victories you haven't earned. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Tabitha's voice softened. Everyone respected him, even Caldwell, though they clashed often enough. Tell me about him, Nathan prompted gently. And suddenly, Tabitha found herself really talking about her father, about his quiet strength, his love of the land, how he'd taught her everything from breaking horses to reading Shakespeare by lamplight, how he'd supported her decision not to marry any of the local boys who came calling, understanding that none of them saw her as more than a means to acquire land. He always said I'd know when it was right, she said, moving a checker absently, that there was no hurry to settle. Nathan captured her piece. And was he right? Did you know? Tabitha looked up, meeting his gaze across the board. I never had the chance to find out. There was a man once. A horse trader from Oregon. We exchanged letters for nearly a year. But then Papa got sick, and the ranch needed all my attention. What happened to the horse trader? He married someone else. She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant about a wound that had cut deeper than she cared to admit. It was for the best. I couldn't leave Papa and he couldn't stay. Nathan studied her face. You don't regret your choice? It wasn't a choice. It was duty. She moved another checker. Your turn. They played in silence for a while, the rain creating a cocoon around the house, isolating them from the world outside. As afternoon faded into evening, Tabitha lit lamps against the gathering darkness. I should see to the animals, Nathan said after she won their third game. I'll come help, she offered. The rain's letting up a bit. They donned coats and made their way to the barn, splashing through puddles. Inside, the animals greeted them eagerly, and they worked together efficiently, feeding and watering in the familiar routine they'd established over the past days. Isabella whickered softly when Nathan approached her stall. He checked her leg, nodding with satisfaction at her progress. "She'll be ready tomorrow, rain or shine," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Tabitha nodded, focusing on measuring oats into a bucket. "Wyoming awaits." "Yes." Nathan leaned against the stall door. "Though I've been thinking." "About?" she prompted when he didn't continue. "What if I didn't go straight to Wyoming?" He turned to face her fully. "What if I stayed a while longer? Helped you get the ranch ready for winter?" Tabitha's heart stuttered. "Why would you do that?" "Because you need help. Because Caldwell's threats weren't idle. Because," he took a breath, "because I haven't felt this settled in a very long time." "You barely know me," she said, though the words lacked conviction. "I know enough." He stepped closer. "I know you're strong, stubborn, kind to animals, and wary of men. I know you love this land with everything in you. I know your hands are capable but gentle, and your smile, when you let it show, lights up your whole face." Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Reid, Nathan," he corrected softly. "Nathan," she conceded. "I can't ask you to delay your plans for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His eyes held hers steadily. "And plans can change when something more important comes along." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Tabitha found herself unable to look away from his face, from the earnestness in his expression. "What about your land in Wyoming?" she asked, grasping for practical concerns. "It's been there for years. It'll be there come spring." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Unless you want me to go." Did she? The sensible answer was yes. A man she'd known less than a week couldn't possibly be trusted with her heart, her home, her future. Yet something deeper than reason urged her to take this chance, to acknowledge the connection that had formed between them with surprising speed and strength. "I don't want you to go," she admitted finally, the words barely audible above the pattering rain. Nathan's smile was slow and warm. "Then I'll stay. For as long as you'll have me." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Tabitha was acutely aware of how close they stood, of the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. "We should get back to the house," she said, breaking the spell before she could do something reckless like step into his arms. "It's getting late." As they walked back through the rain-washed yard, Nathan's hand brushed against hers, not quite holding, but a promise of contact that sent a shiver up her arm that had nothing to do with the damp chill. The week that followed brought clear skies and a subtle shift in their relationship. Nathan moved his belongings from the barn to the small room off the kitchen that had once been her father's study. They worked side by side during the days, repairing the ranch in preparation for winter, and spent evenings talking by the fire or playing checkers. Tabitha found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the confident way he handled tools, the gentleness with which he treated animals, the quiet concentration on his face when he read one of her father's books by lamplight. Each observation added to the growing certainty that Nathan Reid was unlike any man she'd known before. But caution still held her back from acknowledging the feelings taking root in her heart. He had promised to stay through winter, but what then? Men had a way of growing restless, of yearning for something beyond the horizon. Her mother had followed such a man to Montana and died young and lonely for her trouble. On Saturday morning, Nathan announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. "I can make a list," Tabitha offered, looking up from the bread dough she was kneading. "Save you the trip. Actually, I thought we might go together." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Isabella's fully recovered, and you haven't left the ranch since I arrived." Tabitha hesitated. She'd been avoiding town, dreading the pitying looks and whispered comments that followed a new widow. But the prospect of going with Nathan somehow made it seem less daunting. "I suppose we do need flour," she conceded, punching down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "And coffee." Nathan's face brightened. "We'll make a day of it." Take the wagon so we can bring back everything we need." 2 hours later, they were on the road to Silver Creek, Tabitha driving the freshly repaired wagon while Nathan rode Isabella alongside. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, the mountains sharp against a blue sky, aspens glowing gold along the creek banks. "Beautiful country," Nathan commented, taking in the view. "Yes," Tabitha agreed, unable to contain her pride in the landscape she called home. "Most beautiful in the world, if you ask me. Ever been anywhere else?" She shook her head. "Furthest I've been is Helena, once, when Papa had business with the territorial office." "Would you want to? See other places, I mean." The question gave her pause. Once, as a girl, she dreamed of visiting the places she read about in books, the bustling streets of New York, the rolling hills of Kentucky, perhaps even the storied cities of Europe. But those dreams had faded as the responsibilities of the ranch grew. "Maybe someday," she answered honestly. "But Montana will always be home." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Home isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's where you choose to put down roots." His words carried a weight she couldn't quite interpret. Before she could question him further, Silver Creek appeared around a bend in the road, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the creek that gave the town its name. Despite its small size, Silver Creek boasted all the essentials: a general store, blacksmith, saloon, small hotel, and the recently added telegraph office. As they entered the main street, Tabitha felt eyes turning toward them, curious about the stranger accompanying the widow Parker. They hitched the wagon in front of the general store, and Nathan helped Tabitha down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The touch sent warmth spreading through her despite the cool morning air. Mrs. Parker greeted Mrs. Wilson, the storekeeper's wife, as they entered. Her gaze flicked curiously between Tabitha and Nathan. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town so soon after." "Well, you know. Life goes on, Mrs. Wilson," Tabitha replied evenly. "We need supplies for the winter." Of course. Mrs. Wilson's attention fixed on Nathan. "And who might this gentleman be?" "Nathan Reid, madam," he answered before Tabitha could speak. "I'm helping Mrs. Parker prepare the ranch for winter." Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Is that so? How?" "Neighborly." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Reed's horse was injured, and he stayed to help with repairs in exchange for lodging," she explained stiffly. "We need flour, coffee, sugar, and salt. And nails, 3 pounds of the 10-penny size." They gathered their supplies quickly, Tabitha pointedly ignoring Mrs. Wilson's meaningful glances and whispered comments to her husband. By the time they'd loaded their purchases into the wagon, Tabitha's mood had soured considerably. "The whole town will be talking by sundown," she muttered as they walked toward the telegraph office, where Nathan wanted to send a message regarding his Wyoming property. "Does that bother you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "It shouldn't," she admitted. "But it does. They don't understand." "Understand what?" Tabitha stopped walking, frustrated by her inability to articulate her feelings. "That it's not. That we're not." "Oh, never mind." Nathan's expression softened. "For what it's worth, I don't give a damn what they think. But I understand if you do." Before she could respond, a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Thomas Miller, the town's young lawyer, hurrying toward them. His normally neat appearance was somewhat disheveled, as if he'd rushed to catch them. "Mrs. Parker, I've been meaning to ride out to see you," he said, slightly breathless. "There's a matter concerning your father's will that requires attention." "Is something wrong?" Tabitha asked, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Miller glanced at Nathan, clearly uncomfortable discussing private matters in front of a stranger. "This is Mr. Reid," Tabitha introduced. "He's a friend." "I see." Miller nodded perfunctorily toward Nathan. "Mrs. Parker, could we speak privately for a moment?" It's rather important. Nathan touched her arm lightly. I'll go send my telegram. Take your time. As he walked away, Miller led Tabitha to a bench outside his office. I've discovered something concerning in your father's loan agreements, he began without preamble. It seems he took a mortgage on the ranch from the bank in Helena 2 years ago during the drought, I imagine. A mortgage? Tabitha repeated, stunned. That's impossible. Papa would have told me. Nevertheless, it exists. $500 at 12% interest, secured against the property. Miller removed papers from his satchel. The payments were current until his death, but now there's a balance due next month of nearly $100. Tabitha stared at the documents, recognizing her father's signature with a sinking heart. I don't have that kind of money, she whispered. I thought as much. Miller looked genuinely sympathetic. There might be options extending the terms, perhaps. But I wanted you to know that Henry Caldwell was at the bank yesterday, inquiring about the status of the loan. Caldwell, she repeated bitterly. So that's why he's been so persistent. He knows I can't make the payment. It would appear so. If you default, the bank could foreclose, and Caldwell would be first in line to purchase. Tabitha felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. All her determination to keep the ranch, all her proud refusals of Caldwell's offers, and now she might lose everything anyway. How long do I have? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. The payment is due November 15th. After that, there's a 30-day grace period before foreclosure proceedings begin. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to come up with more money than she'd seen in years. Thank you for telling me, Mr. Miller, she said, rising shakily to her feet. I'll figure something out. Miller patted her hand awkwardly. I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Parker. Your father was a good man. If there's anything I can do to help. But they both knew there was nothing he could do. Tabitha walked away in a daze, nearly colliding with Nathan as he returned from the telegraph office. Tabitha? His face creased with concern as he took in her expression. What's happened? She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak without breaking down in the middle of the street. Not here. Please. Nathan nodded, immediately understanding. Let's go home. The ride back to the ranch passed in weighted silence. Tabitha stared straight ahead, mechanically handling the reins, her mind racing through impossible calculations. The small amount of cash her father had left wouldn't cover half the payment. The few remaining horses were too old to bring much at auction. The fall harvest from her garden was enough to feed her through winter, but not to sell for profit. When they reached the ranch, Nathan helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle on her waist. Tell me, he said simply. And so she did, the words pouring out as they sat at the kitchen table. Her father's secret mortgage, Caldwell's scheme to take the ranch, the looming deadline that seemed impossible to meet. He must have been desperate, she concluded, staring down at her clenched hands. The drought nearly ruined us. I just wish he'd told me. He was protecting you, Nathan said softly, trying to handle it himself. And now I'll lose everything anyway. Tabitha blinked back tears. Everything he worked for. Everything I've fought to keep. Nathan reached across the table, covering her hands with his. You won't lose it. How can you be so sure? I can't make that payment, it's impossible. Nothing's impossible. His grip tightened reassuringly. We'll find a way, Tabitha. Together. The simple declaration we, not you, pierced through her despair. She looked up, meeting his eyes. This isn't your burden to bear. Maybe I want to bear it with you. His gaze held hers steadily. Maybe that's what people do when they care about each other. The words hung in the air between them, an admission neither had voiced before. Tabitha felt something shift inside her chest, a wall beginning to crumble. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? Nathan was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Because in all my wandering, I've never met anyone like you. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel the need to keep moving. Because he took a deep breath. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Tabitha Parker. The confession struck her like a physical blow. She'd suspected, hoped, feared his feelings might be deepening, but to hear them spoken aloud made them real in a way she wasn't prepared for. You can't, she protested weakly. It's too soon. You don't know me well enough. Some things don't need time, he replied, his voice gentle but certain. Some things you just know, right down to your bones. Tabitha pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. I need to think. She moved to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. Everything's happening too fast. She heard him rise but didn't turn. I understand, he said quietly. And I'll respect whatever you decide. But I won't take back what I said, because it's the truth. Even if it is, she replied, her voice barely audible. How can it matter now? In 6 weeks, I could lose everything. Then we have 6 weeks to make sure you don't. The determination in his voice made her finally turn to face him. I have some savings, not enough for the whole payment, but it's a start. I can't take your money. You're not taking it. I'm investing in our future. He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. If you want that too. Our future. The words echoed in her mind, tantalizing and terrifying in equal measure. Did she dare believe in such a possibility? I don't know what I want, she admitted honestly. Except to keep my home. Nathan nodded, accepting her answer, without pushing further. Then let's start there. Tomorrow, we'll begin figuring out how to raise the rest of that money. As he turned to leave the kitchen, Tabitha found herself calling after him. Nathan. He paused in the doorway, looking back. Thank you, she said softly, for not giving up. His smile was gentle. I'm not the giving up kind, Tabitha. Not on things that matter. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a hint of frost sparkling on the grass. Tabitha rose early, her mind clearer after a night's rest. She found Nathan already in the kitchen, bent over papers spread across the table. What's all this? She asked, peering over his shoulder. Plans, he replied, pulling out a chair for her. I've been calculating what we might sell, what we might trade, how much we need. Tabitha sat beside him, touched by his commitment to her problem. And we need $70 more, assuming I contribute 30 from my savings. He pointed to his figures. The vegetable harvest won't bring much, but those preserves might fetch a decent price in town. Mrs. Wilson would buy them, Tabitha agreed, examining his neat columns. But not enough for what we need. What about the horses? Not to sell outright, but could you board horses for the winter? There must be ranchers looking for good stables. Tabitha considered this. Maybe. The barn has empty stalls, and we have enough hay for more animals. And what about your skills? You know horses better than anyone I've met. Could you offer training? In winter? She asked skeptically. People still need horses broken and trained, regardless of season. Your father's reputation must count for something. The conversation continued through breakfast, ideas flowing more freely as they built on each other's suggestions. By mid-morning, they had a list of possibilities that, while none guaranteed success individually, might collectively bridge the gap. It won't be easy, Nathan cautioned as they reviewed their plan. We'll be working dawn to dusk every day. I'm not afraid of hard work, Tabitha replied, feeling more hopeful than she had since learning of the mortgage. And we have something Caldwell doesn't expect. What's that? Each other. The words slipped out before she could censor them, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Nathan's expression softened. Yes, he agreed quietly. We do. That afternoon, they rode into town together, approaching shopkeepers about Tabitha's preserves, the blacksmith about boarding his draft horses for winter, and several ranchers about training services. The responses were cautiously positive, no firm commitments, but enough interest to sustain their hope. As they prepared to leave town, Tabitha noticed Nathan speaking with a telegraph operator. He returned with a satisfied expression. "What was that about?" she asked as they mounted their horses. "Just checking if there was any reply to my message from yesterday," he answered easily. "Nothing yet." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Tabitha didn't press. Nathan had been nothing but honest with her. She could trust him with his own affairs. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Nathan repaired the empty stalls in the barn while Tabitha rode to neighboring ranches offering her training services. They jarred the last of the garden harvest and took preserves into town every few days. Slowly, painfully slowly, their fund grew. Throughout it all, Nathan never mentioned his declaration of feelings again, giving Tabitha the space she'd requested. But she felt his eyes on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, saw the care he took with tasks to make her life easier, noticed how he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. And despite her caution, despite her fear, Tabitha found herself watching him too, admiring the strength in his hands as he worked, the patience he showed with difficult animals, the way his face relaxed into unguarded joy when they shared a joke by the fire in the evenings. 3 weeks before the payment was due, disaster struck. A sudden blizzard swept down from the mountains, burying the ranch in 2 feet of snow and killing 3 of Tabitha's chickens. Worse, the blacksmith's draft horses, which had been boarding in their barn for a week, broke through a weakened stall door during the storm and injured themselves. The blacksmith, understandably upset, took them back to town as soon as the roads cleared, refusing to pay the agreed boarding fee. "It's not your fault," Nathan reassured her as they surveyed the damage to the barn. "Wood gets brittle in the cold." "It doesn't matter whose fault it is," Tabitha replied, fighting back tears of frustration. "We're $20 further from our goal now, not closer." That evening, sitting by the fire, their ledger showed the hard truth. Despite all their efforts, they were still $45 short with less than 3 weeks remaining. "We'll find another way," Nathan insisted, though even his voice held less conviction than before. Tabitha stared into the flames, exhaustion and despair threatening to overwhelm her. "Maybe it's time to accept that we can't win this fight." "What are you saying?" "Maybe I should just sell to Caldwell." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "At least then I'd have something to show for all Papa's work, instead of losing everything to the bank."
"No."
Nathan knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Tabitha, look at me." Reluctantly, she met his gaze. "This land is part of who you are," he said fiercely. "I've seen how you love it, how you belong to it. Selling to Caldwell would break something in you that might never heal." "But what choice do I have?" she whispered. "Trust me," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Just a little longer. Please." Something in his expression, a certainty she couldn't understand, made her nod slowly.
"All right."
"But if nothing changes in 2 weeks?" "It will," he promised. "It will." The next morning, Nathan announced he needed to ride into town to check for telegraph messages. "In this cold?" Tabitha asked, concerned. "It can surely wait a day or 2. "It's important," he insisted, already bundling against the biting wind. "I'll be back by nightfall." True to his word, he returned as darkness was falling, his face reddened from the cold, but wearing an expression of triumph. Without explanation, he pressed a bank draft into her hands. Tabitha stared at it in disbelief. $50 made out to her. "How?" she managed, looking up at him in confusion. "Where did this come from?" Nathan removed his coat, warming his hands by the stove. "Wyoming," he said simply. "Your land? You sold it?"
"No."
He shook his head. "But there are silver mines being developed near the property. My uncle knew that when he left it to me, that's why he held on to it all those years." "I don't understand." Nathan sat at the table, gesturing for her to join him. "The day after I learned about your mortgage trouble, I telegraphed a lawyer in Cheyenne. Asked him to look into leasing the mineral rights on my land to the mining company that's been trying to buy the property. Understanding dawned slowly. This is from the lease? Just the first payment, he confirmed. There will be more, quarterly, as long as they find what they're looking for. Tabitha stared at the bank draft, emotions warring within her. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper, harder to name. You did this for me, she said softly. You didn't even tell me. I didn't want to raise your hopes until I knew it would work. His eyes searched her face. Are you angry? Angry. She shook her head, tears threatening. How could I be angry? You've saved my home. Our home, he corrected gently. If you want it to be. The simple words hung in the air between them, a question more than a statement. Tabitha felt something inside her chest unfurl, a tension releasing that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Nathan, she began, her voice unsteady. What you said before about falling in love with me. I meant it, he replied without hesitation. Every word. I've been afraid, she admitted. Afraid to trust what I was feeling. Afraid it was happening too fast. Afraid you'd leave like everyone else eventually does. And now, Tabitha rose from her chair, moving around the table to stand before him. Now I know that some things don't need time, she said, echoing his words from weeks before. Some things you just know, right down to your bones. Nathan stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. And what do you know, Tabitha Parker? That I love you, she whispered. That somehow, in these few short weeks, you've become as essential to me as this land, as breathing. His face transformed with a smile that seemed to illuminate him from within. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he raised his hands to frame her face. You're sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Tabitha rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as weeks of restrained feelings broke free. Nathan's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as if he couldn't bear any space between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day I saw you aiming that shotgun at my chest, he confessed with a soft laugh. I'm glad you waited, she replied, her hands still clasped behind his neck. I might have shot you. His laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against hers. Worth the risk. As they stood wrapped in each other's arms in the warm kitchen, with snow falling gently outside the windows, Tabitha felt a certainty settle over her. This man, this unexpected gift who had appeared when she needed him most, was meant to be part of her life, part of her land, part of her future. Stay with me, she whispered against his shoulder. Not just through winter. Stay. Nathan pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Tabitha. Not without you. Not ever again. The following week brought another snowstorm, but this time, Tabitha watched it from the warmth of the house with a heart full of contentment rather than dread. With the mortgage payment secured, she and Nathan had turned their attention to planning improvements for the ranch, a larger chicken coop, expanded pasture fencing, perhaps even new breeding stock come spring. They rode into town together to make the payment, proudly presenting the full amount to the bank manager, who seemed disappointed to be thwarted in what had clearly been an arrangement with Caldwell. The look on Caldwell's face when he learned the news, a combination of disbelief and fury, was something Tabitha would treasure for years to come. As December approached, bringing with it the deepest cold of the year, the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. Nathan moved his belongings from the study to Tabitha's bedroom, a transition that felt both momentous and completely natural. Each night, falling asleep in his arms, Tabitha marveled at how quickly her world had transformed from one of lonely struggle to shared joy. On a particularly cold evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. I've been carrying this for a week now, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Waiting for the right moment, Tabitha's breath caught as he opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I've kept all these years." "Nathan," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. He slid from his chair to kneel before her. "Tabitha Parker, I know we haven't known each other long by most standards. But I also know that what we have is rare and precious. I've spent my life wandering, looking for something I couldn't name. Now I know I was looking for you for this feeling of belonging, of coming home." Tears blurred her vision as he continued. "I love you. I want to build a life with you on this land you love so much. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to share your joys and sorrows, your work and your rest." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" Tabitha felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Nathan Reid. I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added with a watery laugh, "Though I hope you realize you're getting more than just a wife, you're getting hundreds of acres of responsibility." "Wouldn't have it any other way," he replied, rising to pull her into his arms. "This land is part of you, and I love every part of you." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, with only the pastor and 2 witnesses present. The town buzzed with gossip about the hasty ceremony, but Tabitha found she no longer cared what others thought. She knew the truth of their love, its depth and certainty, and that was all that mattered. That night, lying in his arms in their bed, no longer hers, but theirs, Tabitha traced the lines of Nathan's face in the soft glow of the lamp. "Happy?" he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "I was so alone after Papa died. I never imagined that barely 3 months later, I'd be married to a man I love more than I thought possible. Life has a way of surprising us." His arms tightened around her. "When Isabella stepped in that prairie dog hole, I was cursing my bad luck. Now I think it was the luckiest moment of my life." Tabitha smiled, remembering their first meeting. "You were very patient with a woman pointing a shotgun at your chest. You were very generous to a stranger who showed up unannounced. Not generous enough to let you sleep in the house that first night," she teased. "Wise decision." He chuckled. "I was half in love with you already, watching you tend to Isabella with those capable hands." She raised an eyebrow. "Only half." "Well, the shotgun was somewhat intimidating." Tabitha laughed, the sound mingling with his in the warm room. As the lamp burned low and sleep began to claim them, Nathan pulled her closer against his chest. "You're the only one I want to wake up beside," he murmured against her hair, "for all the days we have left. And you're the only one I want beside me," she whispered back, her heart full to bursting. "Through whatever comes." Outside, snow fell silently on the land they both loved, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Tabitha and Nathan Reid dreamed of spring, of new beginnings, of the life they would build together on the ranch that had brought them to each other, no longer a burden to be carried alone, but a shared blessing, a shared future, a shared home. As dawn broke the following morning, Tabitha woke to find Nathan already watching her, his blue eyes warm with love. "Good morning, Mrs. Reid," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning, husband," she replied, the words still new and wonderful on her tongue. And as the winter sun painted the snow-covered land with pink and gold, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that this man, this love, this land was everything she'd ever needed, everything she'd ever wanted, everything she'd spend the rest of her life cherishing. They rose together to face the new day, the first of countless days they would share, bound by a love that had bloomed unexpectedly but taken root deeply, a love as enduring as the Montana mountains that surrounded them, as constant as the changing seasons that would mark their years together, as certain as coming home.